Commander Jake Morrison stood in the large white room where important people from different worlds came to meet. His blue uniform was clean and pressed, and his hands held a thick folder full of papers about the aliens who were coming today. The room had tall windows that showed the stars and the blue planet Earth spinning slowly below them. Terra Station was the biggest space station humans had ever built, and today it would host visitors from very far away. Jake looked at his watch and then at the papers again. The Zalani were coming for an important meeting about trade and friendship between their people and humans. He had read about them many times, but had never met any of them in person. The report said they were tall and thin, with skin that looked like it had tiny crystals under it. They were peaceful and very smart, and they could talk to each other with their minds instead of using words. The big doors at the end of the room opened with a soft sound. Jake straightened his back and put on his best smile as he prepared to welcome the alien visitors. 3 tall figures walked into the room, moving with grace like dancers. Their skin did indeed shimmer with a light blue color, and their eyes were large and violet. They wore long robes that seemed to flow around them as they moved, but there was a 4th figure that made Jake stop breathing for a moment. This one was smaller than the others and sat in what looked like a floating chair. Her legs were clearly different from the others, with metal and crystal mixed together where bone should have been. Her violet eyes looked directly at him as she moved forward with her companions. Jake felt something strange in his chest, like a memory trying to wake up after a long sleep. The alien woman in the chair had a face that seemed familiar, though he could not place where he might have seen her before. She was beautiful in the way all Zalani were, but there was something else, something that made his heart beat faster. The tallest of the Zalani stepped forward and spoke in perfect English, with a voice that sounded like music. "Commander Morrison, I am Ambassador Keth of the Zalani High Council. We are honored to meet with you today to discuss the continuation of our peaceful relationship with humanity." Jake nodded and began to give his prepared speech of welcome, but his eyes kept moving to the woman in the floating chair. She had not spoken yet, but she watched him with an expression he could not read. There was sadness in her eyes, but also something that might have been hope. "Thank you for coming such a long way," Jake said to the group. "We value the friendship between our peoples and look forward to many more years of working together. Please let me show you to the meeting room where we can discuss the trade agreements in comfort." As the group began to move toward another set of doors, the woman in the chair spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft and musical like the others, but it carried something more, something personal that made Jake stop walking. "Hello, Jake," she said, and her voice seemed to reach into his mind and pull at memories that had been buried for many years. "Do you remember me?" The room became very quiet. The other Zalani stopped walking and turned to look at their companion with surprise. Jake felt the folder slip from his hands and hit the floor with a soft sound. His mouth opened, but no words came out as his mind raced backward through the years. Those violet eyes, that gentle voice, the way she said his name like she had known him for a long time. Suddenly, he was not standing in a clean white room on a space station anymore. He was 25 years younger, wearing the green uniform of a Marine, kneeling next to twisted metal and broken glass on a planet very far from Earth. "Zara," he whispered, and the name came from somewhere deep in his memory. The alien woman smiled, but it was a sad smile that carried the weight of many years and much pain. "I wondered if you would recognize me after all this time. You look older, But your eyes are the same kind eyes I remember. Jake felt his legs become weak, and he had to put his hand on the wall to steady himself. The other humans in the room looked confused and worried, but he could not explain what was happening because he was still trying to understand it himself. But how? He started to say, then stopped because there were so many questions in his mind that he did not know which one to ask first. Ambassador Keth looked between Jake and the woman, in the chair with obvious confusion. Commander Morrison, do you know Specialist Zara? She is our expert on human culture and language, but I was not aware that you had met before. Zara moved her chair closer to Jake, and he could see that her legs were not just injured, but had been rebuilt with a mixture of living crystal and metal that somehow worked together. The technology was beyond anything humans could do, but he could tell that she would never walk the way she was supposed to. We met a long time ago, Zara said quietly, looking up at Jake with those same eyes that had looked at him with trust and fear when she was trapped and hurt. On Kepler 442b, when I was very young and very foolish, Jake saved my life. The memory came flooding back all at once like water breaking through a dam. The crashed ship, the twisted metal, the young alien girl pinned under debris with her legs crushed and broken. 3 days of waiting for rescue while he tried to keep her alive and awake, teaching her better English, sharing his food, telling her stories about Earth to distract her from the pain. You were just a kid, Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. Your first mission away from home. You were studying plants or something. Xenobiology, Zara corrected with a small smile. I was so excited to see new worlds and learn about different kinds of life. I thought I knew everything about survival and safety. I was wrong. Jake remembered how small and frightened she had been, how her purple blood had soaked through the bandages he made from his own shirt. He remembered how she had tried to be brave even when the pain made her cry. Most of all, he remembered the little piece of crystal she had pressed into his hand before the rescue ships took her away. I still have it, he said suddenly, reaching into his pocket where he had carried the small crystal fragment for 25 years. Even when he had forgotten why it was important. The piece you gave me, Zara's eyes filled with tears that looked like liquid silver. You kept it all this time. The other Zalani were staring now, and Jake realized that this reunion was bigger than just two old friends meeting again. There was something else happening here, something important that he did not understand yet. But for now, all that mattered was that the scared young alien he had helped so long ago had grown up to be strong and successful, even with her injuries. We have much to discuss, Zara said, glancing at her companions and then back at Jake. More than just trade agreements, I think. The galaxy has become a dangerous place, and old friendships may be the only thing that can save us all. Jake could not sleep that night. He lay in his small room on Terra Station, staring at the ceiling and remembering things he had not thought about for many years. The meeting with the Zalani had been postponed until tomorrow because of the unexpected reunion. And now his mind would not stop going back to that time on Kepler 442b when he was just a young Marine who thought he knew what danger looked like 25 years ago. Corporal Jake Morrison had been part of the 3rd Marine Rescue Unit stationed on the frontier mining world of Kepler 442b. It was a rough planet with red soil and 2 small suns that made the days long and hot. The miners there dug deep holes looking for rare metals that powered the engines of human ships. It was not a glamorous assignment, but Jake had been proud to serve wherever his country needed him. The call had come in during the early morning shift. A Zalani research vessel had crashed in the mountains about 50 miles from the main mining colony. The Zalani were still new friends to humanity then, and their alliance was fragile and important. Every human in the military had been told that. Helping the Zalani was a top priority because they were peaceful people who shared their knowledge freely. Jake remembered loading into the transport ship with his squad. Sergeant Bill Davis had been in charge, a tough man with gray hair who had seen combat on 3 different worlds. There was also Private Lisa Wong, who was good with medical supplies, and Private Tony Garcia, who could fix almost anything that was broken. They were a good team, and they worked well together. The flight to the crash site had taken 2 hours through rough mountain air that made the transport shake and bounce. When they finally arrived, Jake had been shocked by what he saw. The Zalani ship was not like the smooth, beautiful vessels he had seen in pictures. This one was twisted and broken, buried nose first in the rocky ground, with pieces of metal scattered everywhere. The ship had hit the mountain during a storm and slid down the rocky slope, breaking apart as it went. Steam rose from the wreckage, where hot metal met the cold mountain air. There were no signs of life at first, and Jake had feared they were too late to help anyone. But then they heard voices calling out in the musical language of the Zalani, and the rescue team spread out to search the debris. Jake had been assigned to check the rear section of the ship, where the living quarters and research labs were located. He had to crawl through twisted metal and broken glass, calling out in the few Zalani words he had learned during his basic training. That was when he heard a voice speaking broken English, crying for help somewhere under a pile of metal plates and scientific equipment. Jake had followed the voice until he found a small opening in the wreckage. When he shined his flashlight through the gap, he saw 2 violet eyes looking back at him with fear and pain. The young Zalani woman was trapped under a heavy piece of the ship's hull that had pinned her legs. Her lower body was covered in purple blood, and Jake could see that her crystalline leg bones were badly broken. She was conscious but weak, and she kept speaking in English mixed with her own language. "Please help me," she had said, and her voice was so young and frightened that it made Jake's heart hurt. "I cannot move my legs. There is much pain." Jake had immediately called for his squad, but when they arrived, they found that the metal pinning her down was too heavy for them to lift safely. Moving it the wrong way could bring down more debris and hurt her even worse. Sergeant Davis had made the decision to call for heavy equipment from the mining colony, but it would take at least 2 days to reach them through the mountains. "I will stay with her," Jake had volunteered without thinking. "Someone needs to make sure she stays awake and does not go into shock." Lisa Wong had left medical supplies and instructions for taking care of the injured alien. The rest of the squad had continued searching for other survivors while Jake squeezed through the narrow opening to reach the trapped woman. The space was cramped and uncomfortable, but he managed to sit next to her and begin treating her wounds as best he could. "What is your name?" Jake had asked as he wrapped bandages around her damaged legs. "I am called Zara," she had replied in careful English. "I am student of life sciences. This was my first mission to study plants on new worlds. I think I have made terrible mistake." Jake had smiled at her formal way of speaking. "You did not make any mistake. Sometimes bad things just happen. My name is Jake, and I am going to stay here with you until help comes." Over the next 3 days, Jake had learned more about Zara and her people than all his military training had taught him. She was young, just barely an adult by Zalani standards, and she had been so excited about her first research mission that she had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment. She wanted to study how plants grew differently on worlds with multiple Sons Jake had shared his emergency rations with her and told her stories about Earth to keep her mind off the pain. He described the oceans and forests of his home planet, the cities full of people, and the way snow looked when it fell in winter. Zara had listened with wonder, asking questions about things that humans took for granted. "Why do humans help strangers?" she had asked on the second day. "My people help each other because we share thoughts and feelings. But you cannot feel what I feel, yet you stay here and share your food with me. I do not understand this kindness." Jake had thought about her question for a long time before answering. "I guess we help because it is the right thing to do. When someone is hurt and afraid, you help them if you can. It does not matter if they are human or alien or anything else. Being kind is what makes us better than animals." Zara had smiled at his answer, and for the first time since the crash, she looked hopeful instead of just scared. "I think humans and Zalani will be good friends if more of your people think like you do." On the third day, the rescue equipment finally arrived. The mining crew used their heavy machines to carefully lift the debris that had trapped Zara. Her legs were badly damaged, and Jake had been afraid she might not survive the trip to the medical facility. But Zalani were tougher than they looked, and she stayed conscious even when the pain must have been terrible. As they loaded her onto the medical transport, Zara had reached out and grabbed Jake's hand. Her skin felt warm and smooth like polished stone. From somewhere in her robes, she pulled out a small piece of crystal that glowed with soft blue light. "This is piece of my bone that was broken in the crash," she had said, pressing the crystal into his palm. "So you will remember me and know that your kindness made a difference in the galaxy." Jake had wanted to say something meaningful, something that would let her know how brave she had been and how much he admired her spirit. But the transport was already lifting off, and all he could do was wave goodbye as she was taken away to be healed. The rescue mission had been considered a success. All 4 Zalani crew members had survived, though 2 others had serious injuries. Jake and his squad had received commendations for their work, and the incident had helped strengthen the friendship between humans and Zalani. But Jake had never heard what happened to Zara after that day over the years. As he was promoted and given new assignments, Jake had carried the crystal with him everywhere he went. Sometimes he would take it out and look at it, wondering if the young alien woman had recovered from her injuries and whether she had achieved her dream of studying life on distant worlds. He had hoped she was happy and safe somewhere among the stars. Now, lying in his bed on Terra Station, Jake held the crystal up to the light and watched it glow with the same soft blue radiance he remembered. Tomorrow he would see Zara again, and he would finally learn what had happened to her during all those years since their brief meeting on that dangerous mountain. The next morning came too slowly for Jake. He had finally fallen asleep near dawn, but his dreams had been full of twisted metal and purple blood and violet eyes that watched him with trust he hoped he deserved. When his alarm woke him, he felt tired but also nervous with excitement about seeing Zara again and learning what had brought her back into his life. The diplomatic meetings were scheduled to begin after breakfast, but Jake arrived early at the conference room. He wanted time to think and prepare himself for whatever Zara might tell him. The room had a large table surrounded by comfortable chairs, and one wall was made entirely of clear metal that showed the curve of Earth below. Jake stood at the window, watching the sun rise over the Pacific Ocean, and tried to calm his racing thoughts. When the Zalani delegation arrived, Zara came with them but did not take her place at the meeting table. Instead, She moved her floating chair to where Jake stood by the window. Ambassador Keth and the other Zilani began discussing trade routes and resource sharing with the human representatives, but Jake found it hard to focus on their words, could. "We speak privately?" Zara asked quietly, her musical voice barely audible over the diplomatic conversation. "There are things I need to tell you that are not for everyone to hear." Jake nodded and led her out of the conference room to a smaller chamber that was used for private meetings. This room also had a large window, but it was quieter and more comfortable, with soft chairs arranged around a low table. Jake sat down across from Zara and waited for her to begin. "I need to tell you why I am really here," Zara said, and her voice carried a seriousness that made Jake pay close attention. "The Zilani government did not just send me as part of this diplomatic mission. They asked for me specifically because of my connection to you." Jake frowned, not understanding what she meant. "I do not see how our meeting 25 years ago could be important to a trade negotiation." Zara moved her chair closer to the window and looked out at the stars that were visible beyond Earth's bright atmosphere. "The galaxy has changed since we were young, Jake. There are new dangers moving in the darkness between worlds, and both humans and Zilani are in terrible danger." She touched a control on her floating chair, and the surface of the table between them lit up with a three-dimensional map of the local region of space. Jake could see the locations of human colonies, Zilani worlds, and other systems marked with different colored lights. But there were also areas marked in red that he did not recognize. "These are the territories controlled by something called the hegemony," Zara explained, pointing to the red areas on the map. "They are a group of aggressive alien species that have joined together to conquer and control other worlds. They believe that peaceful species like humans and Zilani are weak and should be destroyed or enslaved." Jake studied the map with growing concern. The red areas were large and seemed to surround many human and Zilani systems like a closing trap. "How long have they been expanding their territory?" "For about 10 years, but they have been careful to avoid direct contact with our worlds until now," Zara said. "They prefer to attack species that are isolated and cannot call for help. But recently they have become more bold, and our intelligence networks have detected disturbing communications." Zara touched another control, and the map changed to show fleet movements and communication intercepts. Jake was not a military strategist, but even he could see that the patterns looked like preparation for a major attack. "They are planning to strike both Earth and the Zilani homeworld at the same time," Zara continued, her voice heavy with worry. "Their leaders believe that if they can destroy the friendship between our species, it will prevent other peaceful races from forming alliances against them." Jake felt cold fear settle in his stomach. "How do you know all this? Are you some kind of spy?" Zara smiled sadly and patted her floating chair. "Everyone sees a disabled Zilani scientist who needs help to move around. No one suspects that my mobility device is equipped with some of the most advanced surveillance and communication technology my people have ever created." She opened a panel on the side of her chair, revealing complex electronics that hummed with quiet energy. "For the past 5 years, I have been using this equipment to monitor hegemony communications and gather intelligence about their plans. My physical limitations make me the perfect operative because no one expects someone like me to be dangerous." Jake stared at her with new respect and understanding. The frightened young student he had rescued had grown up to become a brave intelligence agent who risked her life to protect both their peoples. "Why are you telling me this? What do you need from me?" "Because the attack is coming soon. Perhaps within weeks," Zara said urgently. And because I know that if anyone can help find a solution, it will be you. You saved me once when the situation seemed hopeless. I am hoping you can help save us all now." Jake stood up and began pacing around the small room as he tried to process what Zara had told him. The hegemony fleet would be much larger and more powerful than anything humans or Zilani could put together, separately. Even working together, their combined forces might not be enough to stop such a massive attack. "What kind of numbers are we talking about?" he asked. Zara manipulated the controls again, and the display showed estimated fleet sizes and ship classifications. The numbers were staggering. The hegemony had hundreds of warships, including massive vessels that were larger than anything in human or Zilani space. "Our combined fleets might be able to match their numbers," Zara said, "but their ships are designed purely for war, while most of our vessels are built for exploration, trade, and research. In a direct confrontation, we would likely lose." Jake continued pacing as his mind worked through the problem. Humans had always been good at finding creative solutions to impossible situations, but this seemed beyond even their abilities. Unless, what if we did not fight them directly? He said slowly, an idea beginning to form in his mind. What if we made them think they were facing something much more dangerous than they actually were? Zara tilted her head, interested in his thinking. "What do you mean?" "Humans have always been good at trickery and deception," Jake explained, his excitement growing as the plan became clearer. "If we could make the hegemony believe that both our worlds were much more heavily defended than they really are, maybe we could convince them to retreat without a fight. That would require technology we do not have," Zara said doubtfully. "How could we create the illusion of larger fleets?" Jake grinned, feeling the same rush of excitement he had felt as a young Marine when faced with a difficult mission. Humans are very good at making things look different than they really are. And if we combine our creativity with Zilani holographic technology, we might be able to pull off the greatest magic trick in galactic history. Zara looked at him with the same trust and hope he remembered from that mountain cave 25 years ago. "You think it could work?" "I think it is our only chance," Jake said. "But we will need help from people on both sides who are willing to take big risks. And we will need to work very fast." Zara nodded firmly. "Then we had better get started. The galaxy is depending on us, and I do not intend to let fear stop us from trying." Jake felt a familiar warmth in his chest as he looked at his old friend. She had changed over the years, becoming stronger and more determined, but she still had the same courage that had impressed him during their first meeting. Together, they might actually have a chance to save both their worlds. "First, I need to talk to my superiors," Jake said. "This is too big for just the two of us to handle alone." "Agreed," Zara replied. "But Jake, we must be very careful about who we trust with this information. If the hegemony learns that we know about their plans, they might attack sooner than expected." Jake nodded, understanding the delicate balance they would need to maintain. They had the advantage of surprise, but only if they could keep their knowledge secret while they prepared their defense. It would be the most important mission of both their lives. Admiral Lisa Carter was known throughout the Terran Defense Fleet as a woman who did not waste time with unnecessary words. When Jake requested an emergency meeting with her, she cleared her schedule within an hour and listened carefully as he explained what Zara had discovered about the hegemony threat. The Admiral's office was located in the military section of Terra Station, with walls covered by displays showing the positions of human ships throughout known space. Admiral Carter was a small woman with short gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing important. She had commanded fleets in 3 different conflicts and had never lost a battle. So you are telling me that this alien friend of yours has been spying on our enemies for 5 years, and now she wants our help to stop an invasion, Admiral Carter said after Jake finished his report. Why should we trust intelligence from someone we have never worked with before? Jake had expected this question and was ready with his answer. Because she saved my life once, and because she is risking everything to warn us about this threat. If she wanted to hurt us, there would be easier ways to do it than making up a story about an invasion. Admiral Carter studied the intelligence reports that Zara had provided, her experienced eyes quickly understanding the tactical implications of what she was reading. These fleet movements are real, she admitted. Our own scouts have noticed increased activity in hegemony space, but we thought they were just conducting training exercises. Zara believes they will attack within 2 or 3 weeks, Jake said. We do not have much time to prepare our defenses, the Eye. Admiral stood up and walked to the large window that dominated one wall of her office. Earth hung in space below them, peaceful and beautiful, unaware of the danger approaching from the stars. Even if we combined every human and Zalani ship in the galaxy, we would still be outnumbered 3-1, she said. And most of our vessels are not designed for heavy combat. Jake moved to stand beside her at the window. That is why we need to think like humans instead of like military commanders. We cannot win a direct fight, so we need to avoid having one. Admiral Carter turned to look at him with interest. What do you have in mind? Deception, Jake said simply. We make the hegemony think they are facing a much larger and more dangerous force than actually exists. If we can convince them that attacking us would result in their own destruction, maybe they will decide to find easier targets. The Admiral was quiet for several minutes as she considered this idea. Jake could see her tactical mind working through the possibilities and problems of such a plan. Finally, she nodded slowly. It could work, but it would require perfect coordination between human and Zalani forces, she said. And we would need technology that we do not currently have. Zara says her people have holographic systems that could create false images of ships and space stations, Jake explained. If we combine that with our own electronic warfare capabilities, we might be able to create phantom fleets that look real on enemy sensors, Admiral Carter called for her senior staff. And within an hour, the conference room was filled with the best tactical minds in the human fleet. Captain Ben Hayes commanded the destroyer Resolute and had served under Jake during his time as a ship captain. Commander Amy Rodriguez led the science vessel Endeavor and was an expert on alien technology. Lieutenant Colonel Frank Miller was the head of electronic warfare operations. Jake and Zara presented their intelligence and their proposed plan to the assembled officers. The room was quiet as the military leaders studied the data and considered the implications of what they were being asked to do. The basic idea is sound, Captain Hayes said finally. But creating convincing holographic projections in space is much more difficult than it sounds. We would need to position the projection systems at exactly the right locations and coordinate their timing perfectly. Commander Rodriguez nodded in agreement. And the hegemony will have advanced sensors that might be able to detect the difference between real ships and holographic images. We would need to add other elements to make the deception believable. Lieutenant Colonel Miller leaned forward in his chair. What if we combined the holograms with real ships positioned to create false sensor readings? A few actual vessels moving in the right patterns could make a holographic fleet seem much more convincing. Zara had been listening carefully to the human officers, and now she spoke up with excitement in her voice. My people have developed new techniques for manipulating electromagnetic fields. If we could integrate those systems with your electronic warfare equipment, we might be able to create sensor signatures that are impossible to distinguish from real ships. The planning session continued for several hours as the group worked out the details of their deception. They would need to position holographic projectors throughout both the Earth and Zalani systems, supported by small groups of real ships that would move in carefully planned patterns. The timing would have to be perfect, and everyone involved would need to follow their instructions exactly. The biggest risk is that the hegemony might detect our deception before we can convince them to retreat, Admiral Carter said. If they realize what we are doing, they will attack immediately with their full force. Then we make sure they do not have time to figure it out, Jake replied. We overwhelm them with so many false targets that they cannot analyze them all before they have to make a decision about whether to continue their attack. Captain Hayes volunteered to command the human ships that would support the deception, while Commander Rodriguez offered to work with Zalani scientists to integrate their technologies. Lieutenant Colonel Miller would coordinate the electronic warfare aspects of the operation. We will need to brief selected personnel from both fleets, Admiral Carter decided. But we must keep the number of people who know about this plan as small as possible. If word of our preparations reaches the hegemony, the entire operation will fail. Over the next week, human and Zalani ships began moving into position throughout both solar systems. The movements were disguised as routine patrol assignments and training exercises, so the hegemony would not realize that anything unusual was happening. Jake worked closely with Zara to coordinate between the two species, and he was impressed by how well their people worked together, despite their very different approaches to technology and tactics. The Zalani holographic systems were more advanced than anything humans had imagined. They could create three-dimensional images that looked completely real and could even generate false heat signatures and electromagnetic emissions. When combined with human electronic warfare techniques, the Phantom ships were nearly impossible to distinguish from actual vessels. Your people are remarkably creative, Zara told Jake as they watched a test of the combined systems. Zalani technology is more advanced, but humans have ideas that we would never think of ourselves. Together, we can accomplish things that neither species could do alone. Jake smiled as he remembered her words from 25 years ago about humans and Zalani being good friends. I think our peoples were meant to work together, he said. We each have strengths that complement the other. 3 days before the projected date of the hegemony attack, everything was ready. Holographic projectors were hidden throughout both solar systems. Human and Zalani ships were positioned at key locations, and electronic warfare systems were prepared to create false sensor readings on a massive scale. Jake stood on the bridge of Terra Station's command center, looking out at the peaceful view of Earth and the stars beyond. Soon those stars would be filled with enemy ships intent on destroying everything humans and Zalani had built together. But he felt confident that their plan would work. Zara moved her chair up beside him and followed his gaze toward the stars. "Do you think we have prepared enough?" she asked. "I think we have done everything possible with the time and resources we had," Jake replied. "Now we just have to trust that human creativity and Zalani technology are enough to convince our enemies that we are too dangerous to attack. Whatever happens, I am glad we had the chance to work together again," Zara said softly. "You taught me once that being kind is what makes people better than animals. Now I think you have shown me that being clever is what makes humans better than their enemies." The hegemony fleet arrived exactly when Zara's intelligence had predicted it would. Jake watched from the command center of Terra Station as hundreds of enemy ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the solar system. The vessels were dark and angular, built for war and intimidation, and they moved in perfect formation toward Earth like a swarm of deadly insects. At the same time, reports came in from the Zalani homeworld that an equally large enemy fleet had appeared in their system. The two-pronged attack was designed to prevent either species from sending help to the other, exactly as Zara had warned, but the hegemony commanders did not know that their enemies were ready and waiting. All units, this is Admiral Carter, came. The voice over the communication system. Operation Mira begins now. Execute your assignments and remember that the fate of two worlds depends on your performance. Throughout both solar systems, the carefully planned deception began to unfold. Holographic projectors hidden on asteroids and space stations came to life, creating the images of massive fleets that appeared to be waiting in defensive positions. The phantom ships looked completely real, with proper lighting and electromagnetic signatures that would fool even advanced sensors. At the same time, the actual human and Zalani vessels began moving in coordinated patterns designed to support the illusion. Captain Hayes commanded a small group of destroyers that darted between the holographic ships, making it appear that the false fleet was actively maneuvering to meet the enemy threat. Commander Rodriguez used her science ship to generate additional sensor readings that made the phantom vessels seem to have cruise and weapon systems. Jake stood next to Zara in the command center, watching the tactical displays that showed both real and holographic ships throughout the system. The deception was working perfectly so far, but the real test would come when the hegemony commanders tried to analyze what they were seeing. "Enemy fleet is slowing down," reported Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker from the sensor station. "They appear to be confused by our defensive positions." On the main display screen, Jake could see the hegemony ships hesitating at the edge of the system. Their sensors were telling them that Earth was defended by at least 500 warships, far more than their intelligence had suggested would be present. The enemy commanders were probably trying to figure out where all these additional vessels had come from. "Intercepted enemy communications suggest they are requesting reinforcements," Zara said, listening to the transmissions through her specialized equipment. "Their fleet commander is reporting that human defenses are much